Number 9. Ryan Perez. Ryan Perez was a Philadelphia police officer with an impeccable record. The 30-year-old had been on the force for 5 years without any complaints being made against him. But his squeaky clean record didn't stop him from losing his job recently over a fight he got into with his neighbor back in 2019. As a cop, Perez had experience handling disputes between neighbors, but he apparently failed to peacefully resolve a disagreement that resulted in him being charged with public intoxication, criminal mischief, and disorderly conduct. The officer allegedly broke his neighbor's window during the off-duty incident. A police spokesperson confirmed that Perez had been suspended with intent to dismiss, but wouldn't give many details about the case. A source familiar with the situation told local papers that the fight happened after an ongoing dispute between Perez and his neighbor reached its tipping point. Perez hired a lawyer and is fighting to clear his name and get his job back. The police department had made it clear that the commissioner is standing by his decision to fire the former officer, who he believes violated policy with this unbecoming conduct. Number 8. LUANY Valeria Salazar Zamora. 23-year-old LUANY Zamora vanished in the Costa Rican province of Cartago in June of last year. She was last seen with a young man from her neighborhood named Kenneth Mejia, who claims he parted ways with her at a local mall. When LUANY's family didn't hear from her, they knew something was wrong. It was totally unlike her to go silent for long periods and did not keep them updated on her whereabouts. Meanwhile, just days after her disappearance, Mejia skipped town. The family pleaded with the police to investigate some leads, but law enforcement was slow to move on the case. Feeling like they had no other choice than to take matters into their own hands, LUANY's loved ones began their own search for her. The young woman's brother, Jose Zamora, noticed a suspicious patch of freshly disturbed ground outside the house Mejia lived in with his grandmother before fleeing the law. He began to dig and unearthed a bag with LUANY's body inside. She had been stabbed to death. Kenneth Mejia was found guilty of homicide and received a 19-year prison sentence. Number 7. Dean Keller versus Jeffrey Weigel. Indianapolis firefighter Dean Keller and his wife had lived in their Greenwood, Indiana home for years when their new neighbor, Jeffrey Weigel, moved in next door. The two men got along fine for a while, but that all changed one day in 2009. Keller was outside training the family's puppy when Weigel accused him of being on his property. Weigel also seemed bothered to learn that Keller was a military veteran. 15 police reports were filed over the next 8 years as tensions continued to escalate between the neighbors. On one occasion, the Kellers accused Weigel of luring their dogs over to his yard and threatening to kill them. Another time, Weigel claimed that Keller's dog had run into his yard and bitten him. Things came to blows when Weigel allegedly pulled a knife on Keller's dog. They wrestled each other to the ground as Keller tried to get the knife out of Weigel's hand. Both men were arrested for battery, but the charges were dropped. The verbal confrontations continued and were often peppered with threats of violence from Weigel. He allegedly threw firecrackers at the Keller's dogs, spat on Dean, swung a baseball bat at him, stabbed him with a fork, and more. Concerned for his family's safety, Keller installed a security camera facing Weigel's property. The long-standing feud reached a boiling point in 2017 when the two men exchanged words from across the fence that separated their yards. Weigel pulled a gun. Before he could shoot, Keller pulled his own gun out and fired 11 rounds. Jeff was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but survived. Police determined that Keller acted in self-defense and arrested Weigel. He pled guilty to criminal recklessness and was sentenced to time served. The police were called one more time after that, but it appears as though the neighbors have finally learned to leave each other alone. Number 6. Kenneth Hoyle and Bobby DePaul. 69-year-old Kenny Hoyle and his wife initially got along with Bobby DePaul and August Dempsey, the 40-something couple who lived next door to them in Philadelphia's Frankford neighborhood. But when Bobby decided to build a large shed on his small property, Hoyle reported him for not having the proper permit. The city fined Bobby and ordered him to take the shed down, but he fought the case. In the meantime, he had an explosive outburst and threatened to kill Hoyle, only to act perfectly pleasant the next day, as if nothing had happened. It became clear that Bobby, who had an alleged history of alcohol abuse, was getting out of hand with his drinking again. Bobby won his appeal to keep his shed, and Kenny was outraged. He made a habit of calling the cops on Bobby over trivial matters, and their confrontations became even more heated. Everyone involved in the rivalry became miserable as the war took over their lives. Hoyle accused Bobby of throwing a cinder block through his car window, dumping a bucket full of maggots on his porch, and poisoning his dog to death. Bobby adamantly denied killing the dog, but did whatever he could to try getting his neighbor to move. He blared music, shined bright lights into Hoyle's home, and destroyed Kenny's fence in a booze-fueled campaign of destruction. Hoyle came to the police, but they were unable to rush to the scene because they were dealing with another serious crime. In the early hours of the morning, he dialed 911 again and told the dispatcher that he shot and killed Bobby in August. He initially tried claiming that he acted in self-defense, but surveillance footage showed that the couple was unarmed when he opened fire on them. The senior citizen was found guilty of murdering the pair and received a 66-year prison sentence. What would you do if your relationship with your neighbors turned violent? Would you move? Let us know in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Number 5. Former cop turned criminal. Mark and Diane Zander hoped to be friends with their new neighbors, Pete and Barbara Richter. Pete was a former Baltimore police officer who had built a home for retirement in Stevensonville, Maryland. The Zanders saw the couple outside one day and introduced themselves. It seemed like they were going to get along just fine. Someone vandalized the Richters' home before they even moved in, causing $20,000 worth of damage. When Pete heard that Mark and another resident had been seen peering in one of his windows, he accused Zander of committing the crime. There was no evidence of Mark being responsible, and nobody was arrested in the case. The Zanders chalked the situation up to a misunderstanding and vowed to continue trying to get along with the Richters. But Pete clung to his anger. He made enemies with several other neighbors, often complaining about slight disturbances that members of the community were tolerant of, like loud music, teens playing sports and riding ATVs outside, and a truck driver parking his semi on the street on weekends. In 2001, the Zanders' house mysteriously burned down. Investigators were unable to determine its origins. The family suspected Pete of arson, but loved their neighborhood too much to leave. Even though other residents were starting to move to get away from the Richters, they rebuilt the house. The animosity went on for 14 years. One day, Pete lured the Zanders' dog into his yard. Mark went to retrieve the dog and was accused of trespassing. He was trying to leave when Richter pulled out a gun and shot him twice in the back. Richter claimed that he shot Mark in self-defense, but a jury found him guilty of second-degree murder. He's currently serving a 25-year prison sentence. Number 4. Eric Martin Hildebrand. A lot of neighborly rivalries that got out of hand started over petty disagreements and escalate into full-blown war. In October of last year, Anita Braddock complained to code enforcement about her neighbor's bright light shining into her home at night. An officer visited the property and found that 62-year-old Timothy Patch and his wife, Rhonda, were indeed violating a county code that bans disruptive outdoor lighting. The couple received a warning and were given 2 weeks to correct the problem. When they failed to heed the order, they received another warning, letting them know that they could incur fines of up to $1,000 per day if they don't do what they were told. They finally listened and turned off the light. Anita, who lived with her 61-year-old brother, Eric Martin Hildebrand, emailed officials to let them know that the problem had been remedied. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. Just weeks later, Patch and Hildebrand got into an argument outside their homes. Hildebrand shot and killed Patch in his driveway, then went home and turned the gun on himself. A neighbor told local news station that both men had lived in the community for less than a year, and police confirmed that neither resident had ever filed a criminal complaint against the other. Nobody went into detail about what caused things to boil over, but family members said that the dispute leading up to the rivalry was about more than just a light. Number 3. Landlord lashes out. 61-year-old Ellen Wink found herself feeling fed up last year when her tenant stopped paying his rent on the room he rented in her Norwalk, Connecticut home. The landlord and former city clerk told 54-year-old Kurt Lametta, who had lived at the home for 2 years, that she was selling the house and he had to move. But Lametta didn't leave, and the two became embroiled in a bitter back and forth as Wink became increasingly frustrated with the situation. She was arrested in September after allegedly taking all of Lametta's belongings to the dump and illegally locking him out of the home. The exasperated landlord had no choice but to let him back in. The ongoing drama reached a whole new level recently when Wink fatally shot Lametta at the residence. She dialed 911 and told the operator that Lametta had come after her because she was cleaning up. According to court documents, she told officers at the scene that her tenant had been driving her nuts. Wink is being held on a $1 million bond for murder. Her lawyer told news outlets that the defense is exploring multiple options, including self-defense. Number 2. Racist Rampage. Jennifer McLegan is a nurse and single mom who lives in the Valley Stream suburb of Long Island, New York. After moving into her home in 2017, dog dew and dead squirrels began appearing in her yard. Someone also kept firing a pellet gun into her lawn. She suspected that her neighbor, 57-year-old John McEnany, was behind the disturbing acts. For 3 years, the man and his girlfriend, who were white, had embarked on a cruel campaign of intimidation against McLegan, who was African American. She told reporters that the couple told her and other black residents to go back to where they came from, brandish guns, and wore blackface as a way to taunt her. Police were aware of the situation and had responded to numerous calls about the harassment. But McLegan became frustrated because they didn't seem to be doing much about her complaints. She posted large signs outside her house describing what was happening to her. Upon learning of the situation, community members and activists joined together and marched through the neighborhood in support of McLegan. She finally caught McEnany in the act after installing a surveillance camera, and he was arrested. His girlfriend, 53-year-old Mindy Kanarick, was also charged for her alleged role in the crimes. Kanarick agreed to undergo diversity and inclusion training in exchange for a 1-year conditional discharge. McEnany pled guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to 3 years of probation. He had to complete anti-racism training, and the judge issued an order of protection, banning the couple from contact with McLegan. Hopefully, this marks the end of her long, drawn-out battle for the right to live peacefully and safely. And number 1. Justin James Ludington. People will go to some crazy extremes when they're desperate to get rid of a neighbor they don't want to get along with. Some try to harass the rival resident into moving, while others resort to murder. And sometimes they burn their enemy's house down. Late last year, police in Lake Okeechobee, Florida, responded to a call about a house fire. They found the home engulfed in flames as firefighters battled to put the blaze out. The homeowner carried her disabled mother-in-law outside, and they both thankfully survived. But the house and everything in it was destroyed, along with the 2 vehicles in the driveway. Witnesses told detectives that they had seen the neighbor, Justin James Ludington, hitting the home with a hammer and threatening to burn it down. He allegedly set some wood pallets on fire outside and calmly walked away, saying, "Let it burn." Community members said that Ludington and the victims had been entangled in a long-standing dispute, but nobody elaborated on the details. The suspect turned himself into the sheriff and was charged with first-degree arson of an occupied structure and 2 counts of second-degree arson of a vehicle. He's been held on $70,000 bail while the case waits to play out in court. The victims told reporter Diane Sawyer that the flames were tall, bright, and spreading fast when they fled the home. Even though they had lost everything, they knew that they were lucky to be alive. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn about more shocking neighborly disputes, let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. I'll see you next time.